13. Now, I'm going to try something a little different this morning that I'm not the most comfortable with. I'm going to try and paint this more like a story than points, because I feel like this text right here just paints itself so well when we can really visualize it as almost like a movie. Okay, so we're going to be a little more narrative this morning, be a little more just talking about the text and not me adding much of anything in. Really got two solid points for this. So I'm going to give you a little background, and then we're just going to read just a couple of the verses from here. We're not going to read all of 1 through 18. We're going to read just a couple verses, and then we're going to walk back through it. But let me tell you this. To paint the pictures you're getting there, chapter 12, Abram. And you're like, who's Abram? Well, Abram's before he's called who as Abraham. Okay, he's Abram. And chapter 12, Abram starts in a good point. God's got him at this place where he has worshiped God, and God has told Abram, hey, look at this land. It's yours. There's people there. Don't worry, it's yours. I'm just going to give it to you because I want you to be here. I want you to be here. And then Abram journeys to the spot, looks at it and everything. He's got his wife Sarah with him. He's got his nephew Lot, and everything is just going great. But then there's a famine. And in this famine, it causes Abram to panic. He had been at this place where he had worshiped the Lord, had a conversation with God of, this is your land, this is your spot. And then a famine hits, and he takes off running. Goes to Egypt. Goes to where he does not need to be. And in Egypt, just to make matters worse, Abram was concerned because apparently he had a good-looking wife. She must have looked something like Michaela Papasan. But he had such a pretty wife that he was so concerned that when Pharaoh and the powerful people in Egypt saw her, they were going to kill him instantly and just take her. So to make matters even worse of not listening to God, running from where he's supposed to be, he said, hey, for this trip, you're my sister. Just anyone ask, you're my sister, I'm your brother, because in the culture, that means he would get to give her away, not take my head off and you get her. Changes the aspect completely because he's scared. Well, then God's like, okay, 1, you're not supposed to be here. 2, that's not your sister. I'm just gonna cause some issues. And he causes some issues to Pharaoh and others. The Pharaoh and them do the math, like, okay, everything was fine. You showed up, you brought her with you, and now we're sick, trouble's going on, so y'all gotta go. Get out of here. I don't just now, leave immediately. They get out of there, and they finally get back to where they're heading to, where they should have never left. Okay? They're back in that area. Hey, here's the land promised to you. Oh no, a famine, left, we're back. That's where we're at now. There's chapter 12 and a few points. So we're going to get into chapter 13. We're going to read just verses 16 through 18. Okay? So in Genesis 13, 16 through 18, here's what it says. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length of the land, for I am giving it to you. So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. You bow your heads with me real quick. Dear God, this is about you. This is about your glory. May that not be missed today. May every ear, may every heart be open to what you have for us today. In your name, amen. So we're going to walk through chapter 13. We're going to walk through a majority of these verses because though there's points at the end, if you don't build to it, it won't necessarily make sense. It'll just be a cool story. Well, we can talk about cool stories some other time. We're here to dive in to see what God's got for us to really grow from this. So I want to look at the first 4 verses. Okay? Some of these I'm going to read, some of these I will bullet point. But we're going to look at this one. So Abram went up from Egypt, where he shouldn't have been, to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. So essentially, if you want to wrap up chapter 12 is how to mishandle when God gives you something. Because Abram, all through that chapter, hey, here's something great, cool, and just fumbles right through it, just totally mishandles it. And in 13, he's finally getting back to a good spot here, okay? We've painted that issue's the mistake, but he gets back to where he was worshiping God. Calling on the name of the Lord, he is worshiping the Lord. But we get to this, that he was back where he had encountered God and was standing over the promises of God for him. And we go with that to see that life got hard, but he got back to where God wanted him to be. Now, it took action. It took actually getting up and moving. And I think that's something we can apply for us today. God's got a calling for you. Okay? Very small percentile of people will be called to ministry. Occupational, it's your job ministry. Bivocational, full, whatever. But a lot of you can be called into a job that can be your ministry because the person next to you is going through it and they need to hear from God and they need to hear the Word of God and they need to be invited to church and they need to be loved on. So we're getting back here to seeing this. Chapter 12 is a mess up. We're starting right back at 13 where Abram's like, okay, I got to get back on track. I got to get everything going. I got to get everything good. So we need to take care of this. So I'm back to where my tents were. I'm back to where I had encountered God, and I am back to where I had worshiped God. And I want you to remember that because that is going to come up again. Let's look at verse 5. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. So I just want you to know culturally, you could have a million acres. Did not make you the richest person. There wasn't cows on them. There wasn't livestock on them. If you didn't have silver and gold, you just had land. Who cared? That was, in this culture, the land that was promised he wasn't giving him riches. He was giving him opportunity. But because he'd already had the livestock, because Lot already had livestock, and they had riches and they had things, they were rich. They had some money right here. They had it in the animals. They had it in cows. Not true today, but it was back then. But let's look at this because we go into this and looking at 6 and 7 because the land could not support them while they stayed together. For their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling, arguing, arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. They also had people living on that land at the time. So here's what this conflict is. I've got so much of my stuff, you've got so much of your stuff, and we see here that it just really started to become an issue because Lot had a bunch, Abram had it, and they were struggling. They were really, really struggling. Hey, there's not enough room for my cows to eat. There's not enough room for your cows to eat. Hey, my guys got to separate your bull from my heifers here. We got some issues. Like, what's going on? This is too crowded. Okay, so it started to become like a family fight. Y'all ain't never had one of those, have you? Yeah. So let's look at verse 8. Okay, verse 8, I really, really want you to paint in here because this verse, when you read it, is just a verse. It's a verse that you're going to read, but I really want you to dive deep because I think there's something very, very important here. So Abram said to Lot, let's not have any arguing between you and me, okay? But between your herders or mine, none of that, because we are close relatives. Here's what we get out of this is if you look at this, okay, so if you go back and you read chapter 12, Abram was selfish. Oh, I don't want to lose my wife. I don't want to lose my head. Hey, we need to get out of here because of a famine. I'm worried about me, even though God promised right here in all of this. I'm worried about me. I'm self-centered right now. So I'm going to run because I'm concerned about me, myself, and I. That's the Abram of chapter 12. But right here in chapter 13, we see a mind flip. We see a whole different change in aspect where Abram had finally got back to where he was supposed to be. Got back to the mindset, the heart that he was supposed to have. Because in 8, he says, hey, we're close relatives. We don't need to fight and all this. But then we get into verse 9. Verse 9 is where you really, really see that change come out. He says, is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. We see that flip right here because Abram just presented a scenario where he is not in control. where he is not making the decision, not being self-centered and going. We see a flip in his mind here where Abram is saying, hey, I'll trust in whatever's going on. And I want you to remember this. Please, please, please remember this, okay? Because we have one big point in this sermon, and it's coming at the end. And if you don't remember this right here, that point doesn't in a minute, okay? Because it did to me. I talked to Kel about it last night even for a while, where it was so insane. So let's get in 10 through 13, okay? We're going to look at 10 through 13. Going to kind of summarize here for you, okay? Here's what it says. Lot looked. He saw green grass. He saw water. He said, hey, there's water for my animals. There's grass for everyone to eat. That looks green and luscious. That looks better than over here. I choose over here. Okay? There's 10 through 13. Lot was given free will. Lot made a choice and went with it. Here's the funny part. Where he ended up picking, for you that really have studied in the Old Testament, yeah, he ended up putting his tent near Sodom, like Sodom and Gomorrah. So, yeah, big picture, he just made a terrible decision, which you wouldn't see till later on. But right then, it was a terrible, terrible decision. But I want to get in here. 14, okay, let's look at verse 14. Okay. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him. Man, it's crazy to think is that God talked to him, then Abram left, then when he came back, God talked to him again. Which probably means that in your life too, when God's talking to you somewhere and that's where He's having a conversation with you, you shouldn't leave there. You shouldn't be running from there to somewhere else. No matter a famine, no matter a lifestyle, no matter anything else. If God's right there, that's right where you should be. That's right where you should want to stay, no matter what circumstances are going on around you. So let's get back into it. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. Verse 16, I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. So what we see here is this is such a great thing. And I really don't want you to miss this because this is so big. Like I've repeated 3 times already, Abram in 12 was a fool and an idiot. Wouldn't even claim his very good-looking wife. I cannot relate to that. He made so many mistakes. He did all these things wrong. And here's God saying, hey, I still want to make this covenant and this promise with you. So what we're seeing in this story is the most big thing right here is not Abram and Abram getting back to where he was, because we know eventually Abram's Abraham, Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. Well, that's only fortunate because of God's grace. That's only possible because of God's grace, not because of Abraham, not because of Abram, but because of this. Because God wanted to make this covenant, this promise with him so much that even after he did things he should not be doing, went to places he should not have been, left a spot where God had just promised so much to him, he still wanted a covenant with him. He still wanted to make this promise with him. He still wanted to give this to him, saying, this is yours. I've promised it to you. The people that are in it, don't worry about them. I'm already going to take care of that because I'm God, and God's plan and God's will works out perfectly in the end. Okay? And even in that, we can relate to this. So I want to apply this today. Because of it being only through God's grace, because of Abram's mistakes, he still wanted that connection, that relationship. Let me skip you ahead to the New Testament. Because this covenant relationship that he's trying to make with Abraham right here, he still wants to make with you. And just like this one where God took the first initiative, Abram, here you are, here's this, here's the land. I'm taking the first step, I'm God. He does that too in the form of Jesus Christ, who came, lived sinlessly, and died for you, for me. That covenant promise, that still desire from God to want to have a relationship with you still thrives today. And we see that right here is that Abram made mistakes. You make mistakes. I make mistakes. Okay? We're humans. We're going to. But God still desires to make a covenant with you. He still desires to make a promise with you. A lifelong partnership. A lifelong relationship that turns into eternity. He still desires to have that with you. So I want you to look at verse 17, one of them that we read through all go. It said, go walk through the length of the land, for I am giving it to you. Remember, this would have been land that not long ago would have been part of a famine. It would have been part of something bad, but this is it. Go walk the line. It's just God saying, hey, here's my promise. Go to it. Go enjoy it. No matter what you see, no matter who already is living there, no matter what, I've promised this to you. Go do it. Now, where's that come into us today? Is this. God's got promises for you. But you would have to take the first step even if it doesn't look like a good first step or a good second step or anything. Because you find that when you are walking where God wants you to be, there you'll find joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, all of that. Because that is what we find God. That's what we can see in our lives and in our situations, God. So we're going to go to this. I'm going to go to the last verse, and then I'm going to give you the point of the sermon. Verse 18. So Abram went to live near the great trees of Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar for the Lord. See, if you want to go with this is crazy. If you want to know, just for fun fact, I wanted to study to see where these trees were. They're about 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. That's where these are pinpointed to be. Okay, luscious, green, very, very great trees, very prosperous spot. Okay, and if I had to guess, Drew guessing, probably wasn't visible when Lot was looking that direction. Because he'd probably be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to pick there. That looks great. So I want you to get into this. The first thing that we should get out of this text, that Abram, after this, I'm sure learned out of the text, is that God's grace is so good. That God's love and desire to have a relationship and be in your lives and with you and walk with you and guide and lead and direct you in a way that brings you to a place you aren't even sure you can imagine of land, life, or happiness, or love is all possible because of God's grace. Even though Abram made countless mistakes, screwed up so many times, wouldn't claim his wife, went to a place he wasn't supposed to be at, went and left a place that he was promised and needed to stay at to be at. He did that. Well, let me tell you the really big thing here. 3 times, if you take my summary of chapter 12, in chapter 12, verse 8, you see this the first time. Abram worshiped the Lord. And then from verse 8 of chapter 12 all the way to 13 in our chapter, verse 4, Abram did a lot of goofy stuff and then had to move back to get away from his sins, from his consequences. But in verse 4, he worshiped God. And then we go through all of this of Lot and all these cattle, and he had to go through and count and go through the situation and everything and separate them and move out. Lot goes, and then God has a conversation with Abram saying, hey, to the east, to the west, to the south, everywhere, this is yours. I've promised this. You're back where you were supposed to be. Now let's get back to what we're supposed to be doing. And then he gets going, sees the land, goes all the way to this amazing group of trees, this amazing spot in this land that makes this place so just beyond money valuable for livestock, for life, for everything that happens there. And then in verse 18, Abram worshiped. And I don't want you to miss this. If you want to look at all of chapter 12, why did Abram mess up? He got away from worshiping God. He got away from where he was worshiping God. He got away from where he was so close to God in presence that they were just as close as friends. And when he separated and did his own thing, there's where he found mistakes. And there's where his life went haywire. So let me put this in your picture. Yeah, we worship on Sunday mornings. We worship God. I love our worship service. This morning was awesome. But where else are you worshiping? Your job stink? You hate your coworkers? It's okay. Okay? Are you worshiping God there? School for students, for people like me that are students. School stink, stuff going on, struggles, stress. Are you worshiping God there? Your social life, your friends, the people around you, it's going up and down, it's bringing in waves. Well, my question is, are you worshiping God there? In your marriage, with your family, especially for men as leaders? Are things not going smooth? Is your family worshiping God? Abram missed out on skipping through a lot of crazy steps if he would just never left the presence of God and where he was worshiping and just so devoted and focused on God. Because as soon as he stepped away from God, problems happened. And that's the same for you too. As soon as you take steps away from God, problems come up. Someone's trying to trip you. Something's going bad. You have a Monday type of work day on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Here's what we need to get to. Here's the big thing out of this. We, individually, have to return to the heart of worship. Because at the heart of worship, God, it's all about you. It ain't about us. Abram's self-centeredness got it to trouble. But when the focus went back on God, when the focus went back on worshiping God, everything ran so well, so smooth, because he was in the will of God. He was in God's plan. So if you feel like a part of your life is not connecting well, are you worshiping in it? Is a part of your life not going smooth? Have you put God in it? Or have you tried to run away from God to go try your own thing? So I'm going to tell you this as the worship team comes back up. We're going to worship in a minute. And I hope you worship, enjoy this worship time and everything. But you got to worship at your work. You got to worship at your house. I can tell you from being newly married, if you ain't worshiping God and having God in your marriage, regardless of you and your wife are good, the devil can just make things so rough. It's just so tough at times. And it's because others, take your eyes off God. You take your eyes off worshiping God. So right here it is. You're going to get a chance to worship a song, but you got to do it during the week too. Because if you only worship on Sundays, the devil's got 6 days to go after you, and Jesus has only got 1 day with you. That's not good numbers.